Mm. Okay, we'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yutapatakalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavasya Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Samsativam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamsya हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपति गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यः च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Hare Krishna. So today we'll continue chapter 2 from the small book Beyond Birth and Death. So today's part will be the last part of chapter 2. Before that, just a recap of what we have already seen in the previous session. So there was this emphasis regarding the destination of the impersonalist. So the personalist, they get to the personalist, meaning devotees or personalists who have attained the topmost realization of absolute truth. For those who worship the Bhagavan feature of the Supreme Lord, which is the topmost feature of the absolute truth, they get to uh, enjoy the association with the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. Uh, the personalist devotees, they get to be engaged in devotional service towards the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. However, the impersonalists who uh, worship the impersonal Brahmajyoti, though they have actually started their spiritual journey, and the impersonal Brahman realization is also a partial feature, it is still regarded as the beginning of the realization of absolute truth. However, it is just a partial feature, and it is even lower compared to the Paramatma realization. So even the Paramatma realization is also regarded as a partial feature. So the impersonal Brahman realization is even lower than that. But still, those who have at least started their spiritual journey, it is still regarded as the first step, but it is not the ultimate. So the problem with this impersonal Brahmajyoti realization is that those who aspire to attain the Brahmajyoti, it is actually part of the spiritual world, because the Brahmajyoti emanates from the transcendental body of the Supreme Lord, and it is still part of the spiritual world. Even if we, it can also be seen from the cover jacket flap of Srimad Bhagavatam in Canto 1. Srila Prabhupada has given all the uh, explanation, like in the front cover itself. From the illustration, we can see Goloka Vrindavana and the innumerable Vaikuntha planets, and there's also the dark cloud, which is the Mahatattva. It is devoid of the Brahmajyoti effulgence. So, at least for those who worship the Brahmajyoti, they have at least been able to worship something that is beyond the Mahatattva or this material creation. However, that is only the first step towards realizing uh, the ultimate feature, that is the Bhagavan feature. And the problem with this Brahmajyoti realization has also been explained, that those who merely want to merge into the Brahmajyoti, though it is still part of the spiritual world, still they only get to merge into the light, and they are not going to experience any bliss uh, simply by merging into that light. Though it is still part of the spiritual world, still it won't allow them to uh, experience the kind of bliss that the personalist devotees get to experience, because since the personalist devotees ship the personal feature of the Supreme Lord, they get to uh, they get to enjoy the association of the Supreme Lord, and there's always the loving exchange between the personalist devotees and the Supreme Lord himself once they um, attain the spiritual world, whether it is in the Vaikuntha region or in the Goloka region.
Wait, why you
But
want
for the
already outside?
but for the impersonal for the impersonalists, they only aspire for
Clear now.
Brahmajyoti effulgence,
Feeling very much.
which is not the kind of destination which enables them to be engaged in any form of loving exchange with the Supreme Lord. And therefore, they are that they will always be in a state which is devoid of any sort of bliss. So just like the Supreme Lord himself, who is described as in the Brahma Samhita 5.1, the Supreme Lord is described as Ishvara Paramakrishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadi Raji Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So he is described as Sachidananda Vigraha. So similarly, we as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord himself, we also have those qualities of Sachit Ananda, but the conditioned souls are not able to experience bliss in this material world. Bliss can only be experienced in the spiritual world, that too in the association with the Supreme Lord himself. And that is only possible for the personalist devotees who worship the personal feature of the Supreme Lord, which is his original feature and the topmost level in the realization of the absolute truth. But for those impersonalists who merely think about merging into the Brahmajyoti, of course, the Supreme Lord does not discriminate against them. He also grants them that wish, because the Supreme Lord himself says in the Gita 4.11, Ye yata mam prapatyante tam stateva bhajamyam mama utmanutante manushya sarvasa. So the Supreme Lord rewards everyone according to how they surrender towards him. And for those who worship the impersonal Brahmajyoti, they also get to merge into the Brahmajyoti, but still they are uh, their longing to experience bliss remains unfulfilled, because they won't be able to enjoy any personal association with the Supreme Lord, simply because they do not even believe in the personal form of the Supreme Lord. And because of that, their longing to experience bliss will always be there. And that is what uh, puts them at risk to falling back to the material world. So that was described in the previous sessions, because the condition of the impersonalists, even after merging into the Brahmajyoti, is such that they will have to remain alone as part of the Brahmajyoti without being able to engage in any personal association with the Supreme Lord, and that makes them unable to experience bliss. So and because of that voidness, they will have to there's always the risk of falling back to the material world. But compared to the personalist uh, devotees are personalists, and personalists mean devotees. So, since they worship the personal feature of the Supreme Lord, as the Supreme Lord Himself wants us to do, because that's what the Supreme Lord says in chapter 12 of the Gita. In the first verse of chapter 12, in the Gita, Arjuna asks which is considered the topmost form of worship. Is it worshipping your impersonal form, or is it worshipping your personal form? To which the Supreme Lord answers, saying that uh, Maya Vesha Mano Yamam Nitya Yukta Upasade Shraddhaya Parayopitas Teme Yukta Tamo Mataha. So he says that those who worship my personal form, they are regarded as the topmost devotees. And uh, apart from the second verse of chapter 12, he continues to explain about why it is actually very difficult for the embodied souls to meditate on something that is void, like the Brahmajyoti. Because the Supreme Lord Himself explains in uh, Gita 14.27, the last verse of chapter 14, he says, Brahmano hi pratishtaham. So the Brahmajyoti itself emanates from the personal feature of the Supreme Lord. So the personal feature is the topmost and the origin of everything. So the Brahmajyoti itself emanates from that personal feature. And that's why the Supreme Lord Himself emphasizes on the importance of worshipping His personal feature. And in verses 3, 4, and 5 of the 12th chapter of the Gita, He explains that even for those who meditate on the impersonal features, uh, they are also worshipping that which emanated from His personal feature. So it is best to worship His original personal feature. And it is actually very difficult to for the embodied souls to meditate on something that is void, like the impersonal Brahman feature. So apart from this, there are also the references from the Srimad Bhagavatam in 1 to 11. So there's this verse which talks about the three levels of realization of absolute truth. Valanti tattvajas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call these non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. The absolute truth is both subject and object, and there's no qualitative difference there. Therefore, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are qualitatively one and the same. The same substance is realized as impersonal Brahman by the students of the Upanishads, as localized Paramatma by the Hiranyagarbhas or the yogis, and as Bhagavan by the devotees. So it can be clearly seen here that the devotees, those who attain the realization of the topmost feature, that is the Bhagavan feature, they are regarded as devotees, and only they are the ones who get the opportunity to enjoy the personal association with the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. Apart from that, for the others, since they do not even worship the personal feature of the Supreme Lord, so they do not get the personal association of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. So Bhagavan is the last word of the absolute truth. Paramatma is the partial representation, and impersonal Raman is the glowing effulgence of the personality of Godhead, as the sun rays are to the sun god. Less intelligent students of either of the above schools sometimes argue in favor of their own respective realization. But those who are perfect seers of the absolute truth know well that the above three features are different perspective views seen from different angles of vision. So though the Supreme Lord Himself qualitatively the same, the Brahmajyoti is qualitatively the same as the topmost feature, but still it is it cannot be regarded as being equal to the uh, the topmost Bhagavan feature. As it is explained in the first sloka of the first chapter of Bhagavatam, the Supreme Truth is self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from the illusion of relativity. In the relative world, the knower is different from the known. But in the absolute truth, both the knower and known are one and the same thing. In the relative world, the knower is the living spirit or superior energy, whereas the known is inert matter or inferior energy. So this duality always exists in the material creation, mainly because that's what we actually see in the right from the uh, first section of the Gita itself. Like the Supreme Lord starts to impart the teachings of the Gita starting from verse 11 of the second chapter. So from 2.11 till 2.30, he is explaining about the distinction between the material body and the spirit soul. So this difference, this distinction, this duality exists only in the material world because of the presence of dead matter. This material world is basically made up of nothing but dead matter, and it is only the presence of the spirit souls which make it appear to be animate. Uh, if without the presence of spirit souls in this material creation, it is nothing but dead matter. But in the spiritual world, there is no duality, because in the spiritual world, whether it is the Supreme Lord or the liberated souls, like those even the liberated souls who attain the Vaikuntha planets, they also get the four-handed form, which is similar to the Narayana form. So in the spiritual world, even the liberated souls, they don't have their material body. Their body is also transcendental, like the Supreme Lord. So the dualities only exist in the material world. There's no difference between the energy and energetic, but there is a difference of quality of energies. The absolute realm and the living entities are of the same superior energy, but the material world is inferior energy. The living being in contact with the inferior energy is illusion, thinking that he belongs to the inferior energy. So this is the condition of the conditioned soul. Therefore, there is the sense of relativity in the material world. In the absolute, there is no such sense of difference between the knower and the known, and therefore everything there is absolute. So the source is one, the absolute truth. The topmost feature is the Bhagavan feature, and the partial features are qualitatively similar, but still it is the topmost feature which is being emphasized by the Supreme Lord himself. Apart from this verse in the Bhagavatam, there's also this explanation in Gita 2.2. So as we know, the verse starts with Sri Bhagavan Vacha, and in the purport, Srila Prabhupada has given the explanation about the term Bhagavan in terms of the realization of the absolute truth. In the first half of the purport, he explains regarding Bhagavan being the topmost feature of in realization of the absolute truth. And then in the second half of the purport, the explanation is regarding the term Bhagavan in the context of the six opulences defined by Parashara Muni. So even from this explanation, Srila Prabhupada clearly explains about why the Bhagavan feature is the topmost feature. It is just that the impersonalists tend to think the other way around. Like they tend to think that the impersonal feature being the source, and they tend to think that the personal feature actually emanated from the impersonal feature. However, that has also been countered by the Supreme Lord himself in Gita 7.24. So in that verse, the Supreme Lord says that those who are less intelligent actually think that I was impersonal before and have now assumed this personal form. So from the Gita itself, the Supreme Lord has been he has been mentioning about the um, the personal feature, his personal form being the topmost form. So uh, that's exactly what the Supreme Lord himself wants from us. So he has given this instruction clearly in many parts of the Gita about the importance of worshipping his personal form, and therefore the personalist devotees simply means the personalist. A devotee has to be a personalist, so there's no such thing as impersonalist devotee. So only the devotees who worship the personal feature of the Supreme Lord, only they get to enjoy the personal association of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. Mm, it is of utmost importance, therefore, that we know the nature of our constitutional position. We want eternity, complete knowledge, and also pleasure, Sat Chit Ananda, when we are left alone for a long time in the impersonal Brahmajyoti. We cannot have pleasure, and therefore we accept the pleasure given by the material world. But in Krishna consciousness, real pleasure is enjoyed in the material world. It is generally accepted that the highest pleasure is sex. This is a perverted reflection of the sex pleasure in the spiritual world, the pleasure of association with Krishna. But we should not think that the pleasure there is like the sex pleasure in the material world. No, it is different. But unless sex life is there in the spiritual world, it cannot be reflected here. Here, it is simply a perverted reflection, but the actual life is there in Krishna, who is full of all pleasure. Therefore, the best process is to train ourselves now so that at the time of death, we may transfer ourselves to the spiritual universe, to Krishna Loka, and there associate with Krishna. So regarding this also, the Supreme Lord has clearly mentioned in the Gita, especially in verse 8.5. He says, Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram. Ya prayati samadbhavam yati nashtyatra samshaha. Those who remember the Supreme Lord at the time of death, they can attain the spiritual world. And he also says in 8.6, Yam yamapi smaran bhavam chadati ante kalevaram tam tam evaite kaunteya sadatat bhava bhavita. It is we attain the kind of form that we remember at the time of death. So it is extremely important that we remember the Supreme Lord at the time of death, and that will only be possible if we train ourselves to remember Him always throughout our lifetime. Because there's this description in the Garuda Purana uh, where it is mentioned that during the time of death, the kind of pain that we will go through is like similar to um, thousands of scorpions biting at the same time. So when we are experiencing that kind of pain, and uh, it won't be easy to remember the Supreme Lord unless we train ourselves. So that's why the Supreme Lord also speaks verses 8.7 and 8.8. In 8.7, he says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yujyacha, my arpita manobutin mame vaishashya samsaya. So in 8.5, he said, those who remember him at the time of death will attain the spiritual world, will attain his association. However, we should not think that simply by remembering him at the time of death, we can attain the spiritual world. Uh, so some people might misinterpret that verse, thinking that we just have to remember Krishna at the time of death. Throughout our lifetime, we can engage in all sorts of nonsense. But the Supreme Lord clarifies in the following verses, especially in 8.7 and 8.8. In 8.8, he says, Abhyaso yogitena chetasa nanyagamina paramam purusham divyam yanti patanu chintayan. So in 8.8, he emphasizes on the importance of practicing. So in 8.7, he says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yujyacha. Always remember me and perform your duty of fighting. So That instruction was specifically for Arjuna in the context of the battle, since Arjuna was a Kshatriya. So the Supreme Lord says, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Mam Anusmarayudhyacha. But it is also applicable to all the conditioned souls, because we are also fighting to cross over this ocean of material miseries and ocean of material existence. So it is also a fight for us. So the Supreme Lord is clearly saying that we should always remember him and keep fighting. So we should always be engaged in the practice of Krishna consciousness, and at the same time perform our material duties. And the importance of practicing has been mentioned in 8.8, the very next verse, Abhyasa Yoga Viktena. So that is the importance of practicing Krishna consciousness. We can only remember the Supreme Lord at the time of death by remembering him throughout our lifetime. And that is only possible if we practice. In Brahma Samhita 5.29, Sri Krishna and his abode are described thus. Chintamani prakara satma sukalpa vriksha lakshavrateshu surabhira vipalayantam Lakshmi sahasrasata samrama sevyamanam Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primal Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending the cows, fulfilling all desire in abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of wish-fulfilling trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. So this is the description about the transcendental abode of the Supreme Lord in Krishna Loka. And we can clearly see that this abode itself is it is also like a product of the Supreme Lord, because everything emanated from the Supreme Lord, including his abode. So this itself shows why he is the master of all opulences. So in the material world, especially for those who are uh, often engaged in demigod worship, we can also see that Goddess Lakshmi is always being worshipped for those who are seeking material wealth. But the biggest problem is that they always want Lakshmi without the Supreme Master. He, in Krishna Loka, he is the master of the universe, is being served by hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis. But in the material world, people who are less intelligent, they are worshipping Lakshmi merely for material wealth. So wouldn't it be more intelligent if we worship that Supreme Lord, who himself is being served by these hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis? This is a description of Krishna Loka. The houses are made of what is called touchstone. Whatever touchstone touches immediately turns into gold. The trees are wish-fulfilling trees or desire trees, for one can receive from them whatever he wishes. In this world, we get mangoes from mango trees and apples from apple trees, but there, from any tree, one can get whatever he desires. Similarly, the cows are called surabhi, and they yield an endless supply of milk. These are descriptions of the spiritual planets found in Vedic scriptures. So we can clearly see that all the attributes described about the spiritual world, it is the exact opposite of whatever we see in this material world. In this material world, we have become acclimatized to birth, death, and all sorts of suffering. Of course, as the Supreme Lord himself says in Gita 8.15, Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam. So this place is meant to be a place for suffering. However, many self-proclaimed intellectuals, in an effort to display their true level of intellect, they often ask, if God really exists, why so many people are suffering? So due to their lack of knowledge about authentic scriptures, they always tend to gain knowledge from WhatsApp University. So without proper knowledge from authentic scriptures, they fail to understand that this material world is meant to be Dukalayam. So there's no point in asking stupid questions like, if God really exists, then why people are suffering? This is mainly due to our foolishness. We ended up in this material world due to our foolishness, and it is entirely up to each and every single conditioned soul whether they want to rectify their mistake or whether they want to continue suffering. So that freedom is given by the Supreme Lord. In the Gita, the Supreme Lord patiently answers all the questions of Arjuna. He imparts all the important teachings, and towards the end, in chapter 18, in 18.63, the Supreme Lord clearly says, Yata ichasi tata kuru. So the Supreme Lord is always willing to help us, but he leaves us that minute freedom to do as we wish. So it was due to our foolishness that we ended up in this material world, and the Supreme Lord is still merciful enough to have descended to this material world, and he gave us the Bhagavad Gita. And he this happened in Dwapara Yuga, and he also knew that since the Kali Jivas are going to be so they are going to be not very intelligent to understand the authentic version of the Gita, he was able to foresee that people in Kali Yuga will be more willing to read WhatsApp forwards regarding the kind of quotes which are not there in the Gita at all. So he also descended as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and gave us the holy name, and still we are not able to enjoy the nectarian taste of the holy name. So he has been doing everything for us. It is only due to our foolishness that we are not able to appreciate what he does for us. However, he is still always merciful enough to give us the freedom to do what we want. And unfortunately, we have not been able to realize that this place is Dukalayam, and therefore we continue transmigrating from one material body to another. Material scientists have discovered many facilities for sense enjoyment and destruction, but they have discovered no solution to the problems of old age, disease, and death. So even regarding this, Srila Prabhupada has given so many wonderful arguments in the book titled Life Comes from Life. Actually, that book was not written by Prabhupada, but the book is actually a compilation of recordings of the morning walk conversations between Srila Prabhupada and many other scientists and professionals from diverse fields. So during those conversations, Srila Prabhupada is clearly countering all these so-called scientific discoveries and inventions. The basic question that Srila Prabhupada puts forth to all these so-called scientists is that the basic problem of all conditioned souls in this material world is that we are all suffering from birth, death. We are all suffering due to birth, death, old age, and disease. That is what the Supreme Lord also says in Gita 13.9. In Gita 13.8 to 13.12, the Supreme Lord talks about 20 aspects of knowledge. So in those verses, he mentions about 20 aspects which are to be regarded as true knowledge. And apart from those 20 aspects, anything else is regarded as ignorance. So in 13.9, the Supreme Lord says, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. So the ability to perceive the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease is a very important aspect of knowledge. So any person who is not able to perceive the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease cannot be regarded as a knowledgeable person. So these so-called scientists who are supposed to be extremely knowledgeable, they have actually failed to realize the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, and therefore none of their so-called discoveries have been able to solve these problems. They cannot make any machine that will check death, old age, or disease. So we know that all our problems start from the time we are born. There's no birth or death for the spirit soul. However, the time when we actually transmigrate into a new material body, so that is regarded as birth, and we remain in that material body for some time. We here is clearly referring to the spirit soul, our spirit soul. So we remain in that material body and we leave that material body after a certain period of time. But between these two milestones of birth and death, we are still forced to suffer due to the problems of jara and vyadi, old age and disease. So even for these problems, there are no solutions. None of the so-called scientists have been able to invent solutions to these problems, though they claim that they are actually trying. But we can clearly see that even those scientists who have claimed to invented some medicine to overcome old age or disease, they themselves have fallen prey to old age and disease. So even their so-called inventions uh, have not been able to save them. Even in the case of the pandemic, uh, from the moment we go to take the vaccination, we were given the form in which it was clearly stated that, okay, I understand that this vaccine may not really prevent me from getting any fatal infection or something. So we are supposed to believe that that vaccine is something like a solution, but it is not really a solution. And it is not surprising because that is how this material world is meant to be. But due to our foolishness and our bewilderment by Maya, uh, uh, so many so-called scientists, they think they can actually solve these problems. But the only solution for these problems is that we have to follow the instructions of the Supreme Lord and liberate ourselves from this Dukalayam, because the Supreme Lord has clearly said that this place is Dukalayam. He says that in Gita 8.15. Then in 8.16 to 8.19, he further gives descriptions about how not just this middle planet, all the 14 planetary systems are places of misery. Because even Lord Brahma himself, he himself cannot escape from these miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease. So even Lord Brahma has to die after his 100 years of life. So as long as we are stuck in this material world, in this material creation, we can never be free from the problems of birth, death, old age, and disease, though these so-called scientists may try to convince us, saying that they are inventing some solutions. So ironically, these people who claim to have invented solutions, they themselves were not able to prevent their own aging process, and they themselves have not been able to fully immunize themselves from diseases. So it is nothing but foolishness to think that we can actually find solutions in this material world. So since this place has clearly been described as Dukalayam, the Supreme Lord also talks about the other planetary systems in 8.16 to 8.19. Then in 8.20 and 21, he talks about the other unmanifest world. In 8.21, he says, Avyakto akshara iti yuktas tammaho paramam gatim. Yam prapyana nivaltante tad dama paramam mama. So in that verse, after talking about the material world, he says, yet there is another world which is unmanifest, and uh, it is also described as aksharam, infallible. So uh, that is the spiritual world. Those who enter to the spiritual world, they never return to the material world again. Another similar verse was spoken in 15.6. In that verse, the Supreme Lord says, Natat bhasyate suryo na shashanko na pavaka yad gatvana nivartante tadama paramama. So that verse, which appears in the chapter titled Purushottama Yoga, so that is also another description about the spiritual world, which is clearly different from the material world, because only in the material world we need sun, moon, and the stars, but there's no need for such planets in the spiritual world, because this material creation is described as the dark cloud, which is devoid of the Brahmajyoti effulgence, and therefore there is always need for the sun, moon, and stars. But in the spiritual world, the Brahmajyoti effulgence illuminates the entire spiritual sky, and it is the Brahmajyoti effulgence which emanates from the transcendental body of the Supreme Lord. It That light itself illuminates all the innumerable Vaikuntha planets. So such is the effulgence of the uh, Brahmajyoti light in the spiritual world, and therefore there's no need for any sun, moon, or stars. So that is the description given by the Supreme Lord in Gita 15.6. So uh, even based on that description, we can clearly see just how contrasting is the attribute of the spiritual world compared to this material world. So since this material world has been described as the dark cloud, so darkness here, uh, in one sense, it means the absence of light. So it is devoid of the Brahmajyoti effulgence. And another meaning for this darkness is being devoid of knowledge. Knowledge here clearly means spiritual knowledge. So this spiritual knowledge is what clearly fulfills the 20 aspects mentioned by the Supreme Lord in Gita 13.8 to 13.12. So anything else apart from uh, those aspects, those are to be regarded as ignorance, because we being spirit souls, we can never find solutions to our problems based on the so-called academic knowledge that we get from academic institutions, because that type of knowledge will only train us to become better than cats and dogs in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So that sort of so-called academic knowledge is actually meant to deny the existence of God, and therefore those who are so obsessed with that type of knowledge, they'll only end up uh, furthering their stay in this Dukalayam. So only if we follow the instructions of the Supreme Lord, we can actually liberate ourselves from these problems of Janmamrityu Jarayavadi in this material creation. They cannot make any machine that will check death, old age, or disease. We can manufacture something that will accelerate death, but nothing that will stop death. Those who are intelligent, however, are not concerned with the fourfold miseries of material life, but with elevation to the spiritual planets. So that type of intelligent people are the ones who follow the instructions of the Supreme Lord. So rather than trying to find solutions to problems in this Dukalayam, it is much better if we liberate ourselves completely from this Dukalayam. One who is continuously in trance, Nitya Yuktasya Yoginaha, does not divert his attention to anything else. He is always situated in trance. His mind is always filled with the thought of Krishna without deviation. Ananya Cheta Satatam. Satatam refers to anywhere and anytime. In India, I lived in Vrindavana, and now I'm in America. But this does not mean that I'm out of Vrindavana, because if I think of Krishna always, then I'm always in Vrindavana, regardless of the material designation. Krishna consciousness means that one always lives with Krishna on that spiritual planet, Goloka Vrindavana, and that one is simply waiting to give up this material body. So again, the writings of Srila Prabhupada are always, they always align exactly with the verses spoken by the Supreme Lord, as mentioned earlier. This is what the Supreme Lord himself mentions in Gita 8.5. From 8.5 to 8.8, he talks about, the Supreme Lord talks about the importance of remembering him always. Smarati Nityasah means continuously remembering. And for one who is continuously remembering Krishna, the Lord becomes Tasyaham Sulabha, easily purchased. Krishna himself says that he is easily purchased by this Bhakti Yoga process. Also, the Supreme Lord himself mentions in Gita 14.26, the second last verse of chapter 14. In that verse, he clearly says, Mam Chayo Avyavicharena Bhakti Yogena Sevate Sagunan Samati Jaitan Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. So, in that verse particularly, the Supreme Lord clearly mentions Bhakti Yogena Sevate. The Supreme Lord himself clearly recommends the Bhakti Yoga process. He did not say Karma Yogena Sevate or Jnana Yogena Sevate. He specifically mentioned Bhakti Yogena Sevate. Then why should we take to any other process? We can chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, 24 hours daily. There are no rules and regulations. One can chant in the street, in the subway, or at his home or office. There is no tax, no expense. So why not take to it? So such is the mercy of the Supreme Lord. He, even after giving the essence of all Upanishads in the form of Gita, he knew that the Kali Jivas would not even be able to understand the teachings of the Gita. He knew that most of the Kali Jivas will be more interested in reading WhatsApp forwards. So he gave this chanting process as the topmost form of worship for this Kali Yuga, and still we are not able to appreciate the Supreme Lord's mercy. So we have completed chapter 2. We'll continue with chapter 3 of Beyond Birth and Death in the next session. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna.